All right, welcome to the Treasurer 101 training. My name is Rachel Coleman and I am the Treasurer for Minnesota Parent-Teacher Association. My contact information is treasurer@mnpta.org. Amber Hoffman is our office manager and her email address is mnpta@mnpta.org. I would encourage you to reach out to us if you have any questions or if you need anything. We are always here to help. I would say that, as we go through these slides, you may see some things that maybe you haven't implemented yet or things that, are some best practices that your PTA needs to put into place. And, I would say that we are not the PTA police. We are here to help. And so if there's something that you need to work on or that you need to start doing, just come up with a plan to start doing that. You certainly don't need to do it overnight. We recognize that this is a very hard time to be a PTA leader, and we really appreciate all of the work that you have been doing. So again, this isn't a gotcha situation. This is supposed to be helpful. A lot of the best practices and things that are put into place are really there to protect your PTA and to protect you all as leaders. So it's really not a gotcha. It's more of a, we're here to help and here to support you. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. Tonight we're going to cover the purpose of the treasurer, required responsibilities, best practices, fundraising rules of thumb, insurance, resources, and then Stump Minnesota PTA. All right, so the first thing I wanted to cover is kind of governance. So kind of why does this all exist? So PTAs are 501c3 nonprofit organizations, and nonprofit organizations have a lot of rules and requirements that come with them. So it's not Minnesota PTA's rules, it's really the fact that you are a 501c3 nonprofit. Nonprofits are really awesome organizations, and they exist in our society to create public value. And the board of directors is a steward of the mission and resources of the nonprofit organization. So no one really owns a nonprofit. They are, publicly owned, and they exist to create public value. So the board of directors is a steward of the mission and resources. And your job is to provide transparency and accountability, to practice sound financial management, and the resources of the organization are held in trust on behalf of the public. And so because of that, the treasurer is really a key member of the executive committee. Don't tell the other officers, but I think the treasurer might just be the most important officer. Where you spend your limited resources as an organization, so your money, your time, all of your resources are really where I think your priorities show up. So as the treasurer, it's kind of your responsibility to remind everyone of that. So, this is where your priorities lie. And so, we really, it's a really important job, and one that sometimes doesn't always get, I think, the value it deserves. But I'm here to tell you that we appreciate you and we recognize that it's a really important role on the executive committee. So the purpose of PTA is listed in the universal bylaws and in the PowerPoint slides, which are going to be linked below in the description, or we'll provide the link to the PowerPoint slides. But all of these links here are hyperlinked so you can get to them. So the purpose of PTA is in the universal bylaws, and so you can check that out. The treasurer's key responsibility is to assure that the financial resources are used for the purpose or the public value that's set out in the bylaws. So like I said, nonprofit organizations exist for a specific reason or for a specific public value that you told the IRS you were going to provide, and our bylaws lay out what that specific purpose is. So definitely grab a glass of wine, read the bylaws some evening. I think they're really, really kind of fun, and it's nice to see kind of what we're really here for, kind of make sure that you and all of your executive committee and really your members understand what we're doing here at PTA. So that's really your key responsibility, is just to assure that the financial resources are used for that purpose. That's what we're doing here. All right, so, and just to clarify, we do have kind of two types of documents. So we have universal bylaws and then we have standing rules. So the universal bylaws were passed in 2018. Those are bylaws that all of the Minnesota PTA units share. So we share the same set of bylaws. And then units now submit standing rules once, and then whenever changes are made. And so standing rules are like kind of, they can be like, we meet the first Monday of the month, or, our elections are held this month of the year, that kind of thing, like more specific stuff that talks about how your specific unit runs. But the cool thing is that then you don't have to go through the whole process of changing your bylaws every time you want to decide we're going to start meeting on Tuesdays instead of Mondays. So, so the universal bylaws apply to everyone, and then the standing rules specify a little bit more specifically how your specific unit runs. And we have templates for that, and we have people that can answer questions on that for you as well. So those are all linked here. But just wanted to clarify that that's kind of how it works with Minnesota PTA. All right, so as far as the treasurer's role, there are 3 key areas that are laid out in the bylaws. I did read them. I read the bylaws, and there are 3 key areas. So the first is internal cash controls. So these allow you to have control over your unit's finances. The second area is a financial plan. So this is basically your budget. And the third is reporting on financial activities. So this allows the board to make informed decisions, and it allows for transparency to the membership and public. So these are the 3 kind of areas that comprise the treasurer's role. So here are the things that as a treasurer you must do. I'm kind of a big proponent of knowing exactly what you must do at a minimum, and then kind of knowing what things are sort of extra additional things that you could do, best practices. So as far as must do, you need to read the universal bylaws and your unit's standing rules. And I'm sorry, that's my dog. He is a huge snorer, but he loves to attend all meetings with me. The second thing that you must do is have custody of the funds of the association. So this means you need to have a bank account, and you need to be on the bank account, you need to know who's on the bank account, that kind of thing. The next thing you need to do is you need to have a budget and make disbursements as authorized in accordance with the budget adopted by the unit. So there should be a budget, and you should have that budget approved by the membership before funds are dispersed, and your executive committee should be on top of those disbursements. You should also have 2 signers on checks. Have checks or vouchers signed by 2 authorized people. Typically that's the treasurer and 1 other person. This is for separation of cash duties to help keep honest people honest. I know some units may not be doing this yet, so I kind of wanted to touch on that. So you don't have to have checks with 2 lines. You can just take the section of the check where there is the line and just have 2 people sign kind of small, so it's just one on top of the other. And this may slow down the process sometimes. Maybe you have, you have 2 people get together maybe once a month to do checks, or maybe you do them every so often, or, you can kind of come up with a system to make it efficient. Maybe there's a member that works at the school that, an executive committee member that works at the school that can handle checks too. And do one of the signatures, that kind of thing. And sometimes during COVID, people had to mail them to the second signatory. So it can be a little bit cumbersome, but the payoff is really important. So, if you watch the news, you'll often see that there are situations where small organizations do run into these types of fraud situations where someone is stealing from the organization. And not that we think that you or anyone would necessarily do this. It's a good way to make sure that it doesn't happen. And then it's also a good way to make sure that everyone else knows that it's not happening. So it's really just to make sure that two people are looking at all of your checks that you're signing and authorizing them. So that's really kind of a key item that we really, really strongly encourage you to do, and it is in the bylaws. So, but if you have questions about how to implement that, just let us know. We can give you some tips. All right, the treasurer also needs to prevent a financial statement at meetings. So at the meetings of the association, when there are other times that this is requested by the executive board, typically they would also make a full report at the meeting at which new officers officially assume their duties. Usually that would be the annual meeting. So the things that a financial statement would generally include would be revenue and expenses by line item so far that fiscal year. So you'd show the different revenue line items and the different expenses. Typically you'd show the budget to actuals, so you'd show the different budget line items and then how much you've spent for each of those items. And then you'd show assets and liabilities. Typically for our organizations, that would just be cash. Most of our PTAs don't have a lot of liabilities. Now, a lot of our like local units have different levels of complexity and different levels of resources. So some of our PTAs have a lot of resources and some of them don't have so many resources. So the level of funds that you have would kind of determine the complexity of your financial statements. So some of our units have, like a CPA and are doing pretty complicated financials, and then some of our units have a pretty straightforward small budget. So it kind of depends on that, but these are the general things that you would want to make sure you're including. And then finally, a financial review. You should have the accounts examined annually or upon change of officers by an auditor or auditing committee. So there is a resource that I'm going to include that is a PTA local unit or local leader kit, and it is provided by National PTA, and it goes over all sorts of treasurer resources. But one of the things it talks about is the difference between an audit and a financial review. And so an audit is when you have an actual CPA firm or a real auditor go through and they actually check every item and they confirm that all of your statements are correct and complete, and they check all of your line items. The other option is kind of an internal financial review, and that would be where you would have someone that is in your PTA that isn't necessarily someone that isn't like a signer on checks. Just look at your books and make sure that everything's above board. So they would just check your records and things like that. Most PTAs, that's the kind of thing they would do. You could even, if you didn't have a lot of people within your PTA that were interested in doing that, you could even swap with a different PTA. So you could find a PTA, another local PTA maybe in your district or a friend, and have, you could look at their books for them and they could look at yours. And so you don't necessarily need to hire a full auditing firm to do this unless you have, significant assets. But it's just someone looking at those financials just to make sure that you are following those policies and that kind of thing. But the resource that is provided from National PTA does have a checklist of the things that you would go through for that financial review. So take a peek at that. Let us know if you have questions. It usually isn't a super cumbersome activity, but again, it's just keeping people honest and making sure that we have some accountability. All right, the other thing the treasurer must do is keep records. So you need to keep full and accurate records of receipts and expenditures. The bylaws state that each unit must keep the following records. So just check out the bylaws and see what records are required. All right, the next thing that is really important is filing the 990 form with the IRS. So this form is required for nonprofits. If you don't file it, after 3 years of non-filing, you lose your nonprofit status. Nonprofit status is extremely difficult to get, and it's extremely difficult to get reinstated. It's expensive, time consuming, and you just don't want to do it. So the form itself, the 990 form, is quite simple to use or to put together, especially because we actually have a really good resource for you called file990.org. Minnesota PTA provides this service free of cost to you, to our local units. So we pay for it on your behalf, for you. So you're welcome to use this service, and it makes filing super easy and simple. So you just go to file990.org, and then you can start your filing. If you have questions, let us know. And then we do also have a a File 990 workshop coming up. So feel free to join us for that. All right, another type of filing that some of our units need to do is filing with the Attorney General's office. You need to file with the Attorney General's office if one or more of the below criteria are met. So if you collect over $25,000 in non-taxable donations in one fiscal year, if you hire paid staff, or if you hire a professional fundraising company. So if you hire like a fund run company to solicit contributions, then you would have to file with the Attorney General's office. This does not include like GiveMN or organizations that help you sell school swag or clothing. If you don't file annually, that will result in a $50 penalty. So if this applies to you, just make sure you're filing with the Attorney General's office. And this is what the form looks like. All right, so some best practices then would be making sure that multiple people have access to the bank account. Multiple people should be seeing your bank statements. So that means, different people should see them, to make sure that money's not like going to things that they shouldn't be. 2 people should count money. So if you have a book fair or something, 2 people should be counting the cash. Cash should never be brought to a home. So you should take it straight to the bank or lock it in a safe, and then, you can go get it the next day if the bank doesn't have a nighttime drop. I know for our PTA, we typically would just have 2 people bring it to the bank after the event and put it in the night drop. You shouldn't be having pass-throughs. So any money that's going into your bank account must be PTA money. So just make sure that you're only putting PTA funds into your bank account. And then make sure that you're keeping receipts. So at events and fundraisers and things, just make sure you're keeping receipts. All right, and then I have some fundraising rules of thumb as well. So I think it's really important to keep in mind that the purpose of PTA is to advocate for better education for all children, and the other purposes that are listed in the bylaws. And so just keep in mind that fundraising is not the primary function of PTA. So, we encourage you to just really kind of keep that in mind. So for every one fundraiser, there should be 2 to 3 events or services. So, your PTA should be doing things in addition to fundraisers. So, and maybe sometimes those events include a little bit of a fundraising component or something like that, but there should really be things that aren't just fundraisers. We also encourage you to fundraise for a purpose and to spend the money within 3 years. That's not to say that you must immediately spend the money or anything, but if you have money that's sitting there for more than that, it should have a purpose or a plan. There should be something that you're planning to do with it. We don't want to see huge amounts of money sitting on your balance sheet without a reason. It should be going to the mission. We do typically encourage you to keep 1 year of expenses kind of in cash, but then beyond that, if you're keeping more than that, there should be kind of a purpose for that or some kind of strategic reason. And then we also encourage you to find fundraisers that fit your community. So what works for your school? What's kind of your communities? What works for you? All right, some other best practices. We encourage PTAs to provide enrichment programs for students and families. We encourage you to provide funds for experiences that enhance or supplement rather than providing for essential educational items. So that would be, what we would encourage you to do is, if there's like, for example, a supplemental like musical experience, or maybe someone's going to come in and do a cool musical experience, or maybe there's an instrument or something that you could provide that would allow a neat educational experience. But we would discourage you from paying for the actual music teacher, because the music program is really a function of the school and is an essential education item. So we would encourage you to kind of instead advocate for a music program for the school, if that makes sense. So these are kind of best practices. Obviously, we're not the PTA police, but that's kind of the overarching philosophy, is that we would like to see, the PTA's role is more supplemental and enrichment rather than providing essential educational items. In addition, PTAs shouldn't be paying for salaries. Again, like, it doesn't make sense that our PTAs would be providing teachers or paraprofessionals. Those are essential staff that should be provided by the school. And then cash should not be used as reimbursement. It's really hard to track that, so we'd encourage checks, or checks are definitely preferred. We do have a sunshine fund policy, so we encourage you to check that out. This is really related to the 501c3 status of the organizations. So you can't operate your organization for the benefit of private interests. So for example, you can't fundraise for a specific family that lost clothing in a fire, but you could do a winter clothing drive for children attending your school. So that's not to say that, a private group of people that happen to be PTA members couldn't, provide clothing to someone, but you shouldn't be using the PTA itself to do that. All right, another thing that's been kind of a hot topic is, how to handle e-commerce. We do have an e-commerce best practices policy, so check that out. I'm not a huge fan of debit cards. I think it's sometimes hard to keep track of the receipts and to get the receipts back. So definitely, if you're going the route of debit cards, make sure that you're really able to keep track of that, and that you're able to kind of rein it in so that you're able to keep all those receipts and things. Make sure that you are, there have been some recent pieces about kind of Venmo and things like that. So just make sure that you're using, that you're not using Venmo for the PTA. That's not a super secure option. We do have Member Hub, which offers you a free platform for taking payments. So that's an option as well. So check that out. All right, another thing you should be aware of is that we would encourage you to consider getting PTA insurance. One company that offers PTA insurance to a lot of PTAs is AIM Companies. I've included their phone number here. If you do have insurance, make sure that you read and follow the requirements of your insurance policies. There are often requirements like you need to have someone sign the bank statements each month. They would also probably have I think they also have the requirement for the 2 signers on checks. They have some other, they have some requirements in their policies that if you don't follow them, it invalidates your insurance. So read those. There are a couple of kinds of insurance to consider. There's the fidelity bond coverage, which is fraud and dishonesty coverage. There's commercial general liability insurance. That could be necessary depending on the types of events you're providing. There's also directors and officers liability insurance coverage that could be useful for your PTA. So it would be good to just kind of look into that. I think a lot of PTAs do have the fidelity bond coverage. Sorry about that. My dog is very passionate about insurance coverage. All right, so next I wanted to go on to National PTA resources. So the National PTA has a significant number of treasurer resources available for you. So you go to their website, go to Run Your PTA, and then Local Leader Kit. And then they have a whole bunch of finance templates, tools, and resources. So here you'll see a whole bunch of short videos. There's also this finance quick reference guide, which is really useful. And then they have a whole bunch of different budget resources and things like that. And then they also have a lot of downloadable finance tools. And a lot of them are actually in Excel or Word versions so that you can actually use them. So they have a sample budget document in Excel. They have, a monthly treasurer's report. They just have a whole bunch of sample documents that might be useful for you and your treasurer, or, in your treasurer role. So check those out. They've kind of done that for you so you don't have to do it, or you don't have to reinvent the wheel. Minnesota PTA also has some resources on our website, so you can check that out. And then if you have any questions, contact me at treasurer@mmpta.org or contact Amber at mmpta@mnpta.org. And then if you have any questions, please send us an email. Thank you so much.